summer is over and school is back in session, and so is our show, Campus Killings. I'm Dr. Megan Sachs.
And I'm Dr. Amy Sloshberg, and we're the hosts of the podcast Campus Killings.
Season 3 of Campus Killings debuts September 14th, 2024, and this season will bring you 20 all-new cases.
Our show covers some of the most sinister crimes to take place on or around school campuses, or the cases we discuss have a school-connected theme.
In every episode, we break down exactly what happened, where things went wrong, and we provide our analysis as both educators and trained criminologists.
We hope that you'll join us for Season 3 of Campus Killings, and if you haven't listened to our first 2 seasons yet, there are plenty of episodes available for you to binge right now.
You're listening to
DNA ID,
brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime,
Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Citizen Detective,
and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
On March 19, 1980, a rural property owner whose name I don't know was walking in his snow-covered but thawing field in the town of Pine Lake in northern Wisconsin. To his shock, lying on the ground face up, approximately 46 yards off of Highway 17, lay the body of a man. The Oneida County Sheriff's Office and the medical examiner were summoned to the scene and inspected the dead man and his surroundings. It was a frigid day and the man was cold and stiff, but he wasn't skeletonized, he was intact. He had no visible injuries. Investigators at the scene searched the man's person for any kind of identification. He was fully dressed, and in his pocket was a wallet containing some cash, but no driver's license or any other item bearing a name. So they collected his body and transported it to the medical examiner's office for cataloging, and then it was sent to the University of Wisconsin for an autopsy. The autopsy indicated that the man found in the field was white, 6'1.5" tall, and he weighed about 170 pounds. He had slightly longer, graying black hair that was receding at the temples and sideburns. His age was estimated initially to be between 25 and 45, but that range would later be revised. His eye color could not be determined as his irises were thoroughly obscured. The John Doe's body was largely frozen and exhibited either early decomposition or frostbite of the skin. The cause of death was established as hypothermia. But what had caused this man to lie down and freeze to death, face up in a random field in rural Wisconsin? The answer was revealed during the autopsy when the man's skull was examined. There was found hemorrhage and edema of the deep scalp consistent with blunt injury. But the head injury wasn't what killed him. It was essentially a contusion. It was, instead, a contributing factor. The cause of death, hypothermia, the contusion on the back of his head, and the fact that he had no alcohol or drugs in his system, gave rise to a theory of what happened. The current medical examiner for Oneida, Forest, and Vilas counties, Crystal Schaub, told news channel WJFW, quote, "He definitely was not dressed for the elements for that time of year," end quote. The John Doe was wearing the following: a long-sleeved thin blue sweater, a plaid red, black, and white button-front shirt, a camel-colored corduroy jacket, a brown and white plaid scarf, dark blue corduroy pants, brown fuzzy earmuffs, a black belt, and size 12 black leather Oxford-style dress shoes. There was no mention of socks in the report I saw, but I have to imagine that he was wearing a pair. As you can hear, these clothes aren't really sufficient to protect against bitter cold if the man was walking for extended periods of time in the elements. And that's exactly what he was believed to have been doing, as we'll hear shortly. The shoes were the culprits. Anyone who has walked in snowy, icy conditions knows that one needs to wear weatherproof, waterproof shoes or boots with grip on the soles. John Doe was wearing black dress shoes, the kind you wear to an office job with your suit. The medical examiner, Crystal Schaub, told WJFW, quote, "We looked at the shoes, and the shoes were very, very flat-bottomed, not appropriate walking shoes, especially on a highway during the wintertime," end quote. The theory was that John Doe was walking in the snow on Highway 17. He slipped and fell backwards and hit his head, hard enough to cause the head injury noted by the medical examiner. He got up and, disoriented, stumbled off the roadway into the field, passed out, and froze to death. No foul play was suspected. The investigators had found only one set of faint foot impressions in the snow leading from the highway to where his body lay, and he was alone. At the time, the medical examiner estimated that John Doe had been dead for about 2 weeks. Modern investigators believe it was longer, and that John Doe died not long after he was last seen by his family. In addition to the man's clothing, his accessories and personal possessions were collected, cataloged, and examined in hopes that they would help identify him. These were a wallet with $22 in it, a comb and a compass in his pocket, and 2 keys also in his pocket. WJFW said they appeared to be house keys, maybe cabinet keys, according to current medical examiner Crystal Schaub. They were loose, they weren't on a keyring. John Doe was also wearing a silver metal band Hellebros Invincible watch. Medical examiner Schaub told WJFW, quote, "Back in the 1980s, those were extremely expensive watches, kind of like a modern-day Rolex." The last item found in John Doe's pocket was a mini 1980 calendar printed with the words International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, a union. One thing appeared to possibly be missing from John Doe's person: eyeglasses. It appeared from darker marks on the sides of his nose that he was accustomed to wearing them, but they weren't found. If he was having trouble seeing, that could have contributed to his slip and fall. This is just a theory, though. Even though the true identity of the John Doe is now known, it's unknown whether he did indeed wear glasses. The Oneida County investigators were pretty certain that with all these very specific items worn and carried by John Doe, he would easily be identified. They decided to publicize the case. Remember that John Doe was found in Pine Lake. This was about 4 miles north of Rhinelander, the county seat of Oneida, between Rhinelander and Eagle River, Wisconsin. Oneida County officials arranged for the local newspapers to run a short piece captioned "Identity Sought" about the unidentified man, who quickly became known as Rhinelander John Doe. The piece described his physical attributes, his clothing, and included a sketch of his face drawn by a police artist. Well, it didn't work. No one called in and identified Rhinelander John Doe. There was one sighting of him, though, that was believed to be legitimate. He was seen in the town of Sugar Camp, pounding on the door of a male resident in the middle of the night. He asked for a ride, and when the homeowner refused, noting that the man at the door seemed drunk, he then asked for a cigarette. This was also refused, and the witness shut his door on the unidentified man. Based on the location Rhinelander John Doe was found relative to Sugar Camp, investigators surmised that he was traveling on foot, heading south to Rhinelander. But no one knew for sure where he was going, what he was doing in the area, or if he was even a local. Fingerprints had been obtained from Rhinelander John Doe by the medical examiner, and his prints were disseminated to both the Wisconsin State Crime Lab and Federal Bureau of Investigation. But matching prints were not on file in either agency's database. After the 1980 medical examiner's office had done all it could to attempt to identify Rhinelander John Doe, he was buried in Forest Home Cemetery in Rhinelander. Over the ensuing years, the agency continued to try to generate leads on the case, but nothing ever panned out. In 2019, the modern Oneida County Medical Examiner's Office revisited the case. Rhinelander John Doe was not in NamUs, so a profile was created for him in October of that year. Multiple potential matches were all confirmed to be negative. Rhinelander John Doe could not be entered into the CODIS Unidentified Human Remains database because the 1980 investigators had retained no DNA. So, Rhinelander John Doe was exhumed on April 15, 2021. They expected to open the casket and easily pluck out a femur or a tooth from the skeletonized remains. But medical examiner Crystal Schaub told me that when they did open the casket, she was surprised to observe an intact, recognizable person inside. Rhinelander John Doe had been embalmed, an expensive procedure not typically done on John and Jane Does. The entire body was removed to the Fond du Lac Medical Examiner's Office to be processed for DNA collection. A femur and both jaws were selected and sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico for DNA extraction. Rhinelander John Doe was reinterred in his original grave and a cross erected on the grave, which had been unmarked for decades. Once DNA was obtained, Rhinelander John Doe's STR profile was entered into the CODIS Unidentified Human Remains database, but there were no results. At that time, a push was made by the medical examiner's office to obtain information. Rhinelander John Doe's story was covered in the press with a request for tips. But nothing of note came in, and the Oneida County authorities decided it was time for the next step. In January 2023, the Oneida County Sheriff's Office and Ramapo College Center for Investigative Genetic Genealogy agreed that students of the Ramapo IGG certificate program, which I talked about in the Everett Leland Yeager case, would work on Rhinelander John Doe's case. The next month, in February 2023, a tooth sample from Rhinelander John Doe was sent to Intermountain Forensics for DNA extraction and whole genome sequencing. Bioinformatics, as defined by the National Human Genome Research Institute, involves using computer technology to collect, organize, analyze, and report genetic data. This step in the process was done by Sabre Investigations. Finally, in May, the SNP profile for Rhinelander John Doe was ready, and it was uploaded to GEDmatch Pro on May 13, 2023. Rhinelander John Doe's admixture proved to be 100% European, which wasn't all that helpful, and the largest centimorgan match was 95.9, with significant shared X DNA. The remaining 7 DNA relatives shared a range of 71 down to 34 centimorgans of DNA with Rhinelander John Doe. Now, the X-DNA shared by the top DNA relative and Rhinelander John Doe told the genealogists that she belonged on the maternal side of Rhinelander John Doe's family tree. This was because males inherit their X chromosome from their mothers, and since she had the same X-DNA, they had to have that same maternal lineage. And the amount of overall shared DNA indicated that the top DNA relative was in the range of a third cousin to Rhinelander John Doe. The problem was that the top match appeared to be adopted. A social media post she made confirmed that she was looking for her birth family, and she listed her date of birth and location. So her branch of the family tree was shrouded. The genealogy team started building out trees for some of the lesser DNA relatives, which showed that Rhinelander John Doe shared DNA with some people who had recently immigrated from Germany or Austria and had distant cousins in Wisconsin and Iowa. Then they decided to upload Rhinelander John Doe's SNP profile to Family Tree DNA to see if they could make any headway with matches over there. Well, they were really glad they did. The upload to Family Tree DNA took place on May 22, 2023. Both the mitochondrial and Y DNA haplogroups for the SNP profile showed genetic ancestry in Germany. This was consistent with the findings in GEDmatch and the distant relatives who had immigrated from Germany and Austria. But more importantly, the top DNA relative in Family Tree DNA shared 2,538 centimorgans of DNA with Rhinelander John Doe. This was consistent with a full sibling. And they knew they were on the right track because the mother of this male sibling appeared in the family tree of the adopted top match found on GEDmatch. So they already had her name, and the placement was consistent with the shared X-DNA. The full sibling's name was Alan Paul Grasser. A quick search of his family tree showed that he indeed had a brother. But the investigation suffered a brief record scratch moment when this brother was listed as deceased. He had an obituary and a headstone with a date of death and everything. But a read-through of the obituary contained one very important piece of information. The deceased man had actually been declared dead and memorialized by his family, but he was actually missing. He had never been found. The family had erected a tombstone for him featuring a date of death, January 20th, 1980, the date he went missing, and a reference to St. Anthony, patron saint of missing persons. Rhinelander John Doe was Norman John Christopher Grasser. As indicated by the DNA, 7 of Norm's grandparents were born in Germany. The 8th was born in Pennsylvania, but her parents were born in Germany. The Ramapo group presented their hypothesis to the Oneida County Sheriff's Office the next day. Norman John Christopher Grasser was born in Chicago on May 20th, 1948, to parents Cyril Nicholas John Grasser and Marjorie Julia Schwering Grasser. Alan, the full sibling whose DNA was in the Family Tree DNA database, was his younger brother. Alan had 3 half-siblings from his father's previous marriage, but only one of these was a male, and he had died in 1997 and was documented in death records. Alan Grasser gave a presentation about his brother's case at the Ramapo IGG conference held earlier this summer, and he and I subsequently spoke about his brother's case. He said he and Norm grew up in a traditional German family and were raised in the Catholic Church. Norm entered Loyola University of Chicago after graduating from high school, but he dropped out the following year. He was eligible for the draft and decided to join the Navy to avoid the Army. He enlisted on January 4th, 1968 and went to boot camp. However, he was honorably discharged from the Navy for unspecified medical reasons. After that, Norm worked for a few years in the 1970s as a mail carrier in the United States Postal Service. An aspiring novelist, he penned a work of fiction, but it was never published. Dissatisfied with the draft, Norm burned his only copy. Then he became fascinated with documenting the Grasser family history. Alan recalled that when the brothers were teenagers, their mom's mother had come to visit from Iowa and had suffered a heart attack and ended up moving in with the family in Chicago. Before she passed away at age 91, she related to Norm the extensive family history, which he documented over hundreds of hours spent together. Norm became the family genealogist, fascinated with detailing the births, deaths, marriages, and other milestones that characterized the Grasser family. He started a large family tree, working to fill in the blanks using his grandmother's recollections about long-deceased relatives. Norm was also a lover of nature and found solace and peace in strolling nature trails and hiking in the woods. One of his favorite places was the family farm, where Norm and Alan's aunt and uncle resided in the great Northwoods of Wisconsin. On January 20th, 1980, Norm Grasser vanished at age 31. At the time, he was living with his and Alan's parents in Chicago. It was uncharacteristic of Norm to just leave without telling his parents where he was going or when he'd be back. He'd also promised to be the best man at Alan's wedding that summer, so it was very concerning when Norm failed to return home and stayed away. The Grassers quickly filed a missing persons report with the Chicago police. Alan tells me his parents feared Norm had been abducted. The specter of John Wayne Gacy and his crimes was fresh in Chicago, and of course, scores of young men had simply vanished at Gacy's hands. Gacy was arrested before Norm went missing, but still, the Grassers spent decades racked with worry about what could have happened to their son. However, they didn't share much about what was going on with Norm with Alan. Since both Grassers and all the brothers' half-siblings have passed away, there's a lot we don't know about Norm's personal journey. Alan told the audience at the RIG conference that another family tragedy indirectly motivated him to enter his own DNA into Family Tree DNA, which directly led to his brother being reunited with his family. Alan's son died in 2014, and his wife passed away of undiagnosed pancreatic cancer just 2 months later. Wanting to memorialize them online, Alan went to the Find a Grave website. There, he noted that photos of the headstones for deceased persons are often included. His then-missing brother Norm didn't have any such memorial. He was missing and declared dead. Even though his brother had never been found as far as he knew, Alan commissioned a tombstone for Norm to be interred with their mother. This was the headstone seen online by the genealogists trying to identify Rhinelander John Doe. Alan also decided to carry on his brother's family tree research, and he was able to digitize the whole thing and expand it to 32,000 people. You heard that right. The tree, which Alan told me is now complete, is a 40-year magnum opus. In conjunction with this process, in August 2015, Alan did an Ancestry.com DNA test of his own to try to learn more about his family. He didn't find many genetic matches in that database. His second cousin, also an amateur genealogist, advised him that more matches might be found on Family Tree DNA, so he uploaded there. He didn't find the Family Tree DNA testing all that helpful at first because he found only low-level DNA relatives in the database. But unbeknownst to him, his DNA profile in Family Tree DNA proved instrumental in identifying Rhinelander John Doe as his long-lost older brother. And remember, the investigators would never have found Alan if he had not used one of the open-source databases. Testers who use 23andMe or Ancestry must upload the genetic profiles to GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA if they want their DNA to assist in a law enforcement investigation.
Every day, predators are targeting children and teens online. The Department of Homeland Security's Know to Protect campaign provides resources to combat online child exploitation and abuse. Learn how you can help protect our kids online and join the fight. Visit knowtoprotect.gov so together we can stop online child exploitation. That's KNOW, the number 2, protect.gov.
On May 30th, 2023, Allen received a phone call from Detective Sergeant Ryan Barker from the Oneida County Sheriff's Office, who asked him if he knew a Norman Grasser. The answer was yes. Detective Sergeant Barker and medical examiner Crystal Schaub came to Allen's farm and collected a sample of his DNA for submission to the FBI lab to verify the identification. The FBI lab moved at a glacial pace, taking months to provide results. They got bogged down in identifying the victims of the massive Maui fire that killed 97 people in August of 2023. Finally, on December 11th, 2023, the FBI had the results of the kinship analysis. Rhinelander John Doe was a full sibling to Allen Grasser. Allen's missing brother Norm had been definitively identified after 42 years. Oneida County officials issued a revised death certificate for Norm and authorized another exhumation of Norm's remains. They were reunited with the segments removed for DNA extraction, and the body was cremated and provided to Allen to bring home to Chicago. He was reinterred with their mother at All Saints Catholic Cemetery in Cook County, Illinois on March 20th, Norm's birthday. Allen told the Ramapo conference attendees that the identification of his brother and the ability finally to bring him home resolved the decades-long ambiguous loss, what Allen called an unending not knowing. While Allen's biggest question, where did my brother Norm disappear to, has been answered, other questions remain. When did Norm die? He was found on March 19th, the day before his birthday, but he disappeared on January 20th. That's a 9-week span when no one knows where he was or what he was doing, although the medical examiner now believes that he died very soon after he left home. As for how he died, the medical examiner's theory of an accidental slip and fall, head injury, and death due to exposure is accepted by the family. It was a tragic accident, nothing more. Medical examiner Crystal Schaub shared with me her theory of the case. She believes that Norm was walking at night in January in rural Wisconsin. He was not dressed for the cold temperatures, and he started to become hypothermic. He became disoriented and started exhibiting symptoms consistent with hypothermia, acting drunk. The man who related that Rhinelander John Doe banged on his door in Sugar Camp around 2 a.m. and appeared drunk mistook Norm's behavior for intoxication, but similar behaviors are sometimes exhibited by people whose bodies are shutting down from cold. Remember, Rhinelander John Doe had no alcohol in his system. Rejected when he asked for a ride, Norm kept walking and slipped and fell on the roadway, banging his head hard. It's unknown whether he was able to keep walking, but at some point he had to pee. Or it's possible that he slipped and fell while looking for a place to relieve himself. He staggered into the field, and the blow to the head caught up with him. He either lay or fell down, possibly passed out and froze to death. The zipper was open on his trousers when he was found. Now let's turn to the question of why Norm Grasser was not found by the Chicago authorities when he went missing. The obvious answer is that no one was looking for him in Wisconsin. He went missing from Chicago, and as far as the family knew, he had no reason to leave the area. Further, Norm didn't drive, so it's unknown how he even got to the Badger State. When Rhinelander John Doe was found and publicized in Oneida, Wisconsin, TV broadcasts about the unidentified man didn't reach a Chicago audience, and newspapers didn't circulate that far away. Also, let's be honest, the Chicago police are busy, and it's questionable whether they would have looked as far away as Wisconsin, although it is the neighboring state. The Illinois investigation into Norm's disappearance remained strictly local. Finally, Crystal Schaub told me that for some reason, back in 1980, the Wisconsin state police agencies were not permitted to, or did not per protocol, issue bulletins about John Does to law enforcement agencies outside the state. Nonetheless, it seems to me that given the United Electrical Workers calendar found in Rhinelander John Doe's pocket, it might not have been a leap to consider that he had ties to Chicago. It turned out that Norm's father spent 50 years with the Chicago branch of the International Union of Electrical Workers, and his brother Allen also had ties to that group. Had the Oneida investigators asked around in the Windy City, they might have been able to figure out who Rhinelander John Doe was. There was another snafu. One would think Norm Grasser's fingerprints would have been in the system from his time in the military and working for the post office. But the military never took his prints, and same with the USPS, they didn't do prints back then. When Rhinelander authorities sent prints to the FBI, they came up with no matches because he didn't have a criminal record. And the final question, why was Norm in Rhinelander in the first place? He was not visiting the farm owned by Norm and Allen's aunt and uncle, which was about 115 miles from where Norm was found. The couple never saw him there. Instead, Alan told me that he and Norm went with their parents on a family trip to the Wisconsin Dells when they were kids. Norm was struck by the beauty of the area and, as an adult, always wanted to travel to the Eagle River area but never made it there. Alan believes his love for the wooded areas of Wisconsin explains Norm's presence in the Rhinelander vicinity. He was going through some sort of existential inquiry and set out to explore. He didn't expect to be gone forever, a theory we can firmly embrace since Norm was found with a compass and the 2 keys to his parents' Chicago house in his pocket. He also had $22 in his wallet, money that perhaps he was holding onto to purchase a return bus ticket home. Alan told me that he has found closure through this whole process. He inquired whether he could purchase the plot in the Wisconsin cemetery where Norm was interred as Rhinelander John Doe in an unmarked grave for all those years. It ended up being gifted to him, and Alan is in the process of installing a 4-foot granite hourglass memorial for Norm on that spot. It will say, "In Memoriam, time waits for no man," and will include Norm's date of birth, date of death, and the date on which he was found in 1980. Alan also intends to use his own experience as a family member experiencing ambiguous loss by participating in speeches, panels, and classes to educate others about the powers of genealogy to provide answers for grieving family members. He wants to share his message to others in his position. Test your DNA, upload, and opt in. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to dnaidpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.